Hello, welcome to our event. Welcome everyone, thanks for coming here. So this is the Meet the World about a topic which concerns us more directly than the one that we had last time. Last time we were talking about Russia and Ukraine and how it concerns normal people living in those areas. And now we're talking about something which concerns us as students and professors at a Dutch university. We're talking about this initiative called the Nieuwe Universiteit, which is a... Hello, welcome. Please take a seat. Please don't be shy. Which concerns all of us, because what we are seeing now these days is that universities seem to be turning to institutions which instead of educating people and making them into personalities who could tackle this unforeseeable future in new ways, we are turning them into experts in their little field, or cogs in a machine, or whatever you might call it. We are turning them into pieces of puzzle that can fit into a structure which is predefined, rather than someone who's prepared to deal with the new kinds of future that we can't possibly predict. So please, welcome Jan Blommaert from Tilburg University, Humanities faculty. Dan Hassler-Forrest, Amsterdam University, Humanities faculty. And first, to get some idea, few of you who don't know about this initiative, we have a little video, we'll play it and then we start with the discussion. So.
Het college van bestuur van de Universiteit van Amsterdam doet alsof de bezetting van het Bungehuis een actie is van enkele studenten.
Ik ben hier om te laten zien dat deze actie niet enkel een bedenksel is van een paar studenten,
maar een vervolg van een breder sentiment dat in de samenleving en de studentengemeenschap heerst.
Met deze actie willen wij een belangrijk debat aanwakkeren.
Wat moet het onderwijs dienen?
De macht van het geld of de constructie van een rechtvaardiger maatschappij?
Wij zijn studenten.
Wij zouden hier als kritische denkers moeten worden opgeleid.
Wij hebben een stem om mee te praten over de toekomst van ons land en de rol van de universiteit daarin.
De bezetting van het Bungehuis staat daar symbool voor.
Ik ben Oscar en ik ben hier omdat de universiteit geen bedrijf is.
Ik ben Jaël en ik ben hier omdat ik eerlijk onderwijs wil voor iedereen.
Ik ben Lotte en ik ben hier om een einde te maken aan de focus op excellentie en rendementsdenken.
Ik ben Isa en ik ben hier omdat mijn studie niet rendabel is volgens het management en dreigt te verdwijnen.
Ik ben hier omdat ik denk dat de wereld kritische mensen nodig heeft die nee durven zeggen.
Ik ben hier omdat het onderwijs een universeel recht is dat niet overgelaten mag worden aan de energie van de vrije markt.
Ik ben Parsifal en ik ben hier omdat ik ben voor meer openbaarheid op de universiteit.
Ik ben Simon en ik ben hier omdat ik geloof dat juist die paar studenten Arabisch het verschil kunnen maken.
Ik ben Victor en ik ben hier omdat ik het belachelijk vind dat studenten en medewerkers zo weinig te zeggen hebben over hun eigen universiteit.
Ik ben Daan en ik ben hier omdat ik een intrinsieke waarde zie in de diepgang van mijn studie.
Ik ben Martin en ik ben hier omdat ik in echte democratie geloof.
Ik ben Daniel en ik ben hier omdat de universiteit er voor iedereen moet zijn en niet alleen voor het bestuur.
Ik ben Mart en ik ben hier omdat mijn studie wordt vormgegeven vanuit een gebrekkig systeem.
Ik ben Eleni en ik ben hier omdat ik vecht voor de fundamenten van onze samenleving.
Ik ben Fokker en ik ben hier omdat ik vind dat het onderwijsdebat in Nederland opengebroken moet worden.
Thank you. Okay, you see that the lights are now back on. That's not by accident. We mean this as a gesture. There is not only me and two guests. We are all guests, so we all should be active and ask questions if something interests us. So please, if you would like to ask questions, just raise your hand and the microphone will come to you. Feel free to ask questions whenever you feel something is not clear enough. All right. So, Mr. Dan Hassler-Forrest,
He's Dan. Please just call me Dan.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll call you Dan. Dan, well, I told our guests a bit about this approach where universities are trying to educate people as sort of products, but these students are talking about some democratic deficit, or that they are for democracy. Could you please explain what they mean by that?
Sure, I'll try. So the new university, as it's been established not only in Amsterdam now, but here in Tilburg and in Utrecht, Rotterdam, in Maastricht. It's popping up all over the Netherlands, and we're establishing actually an international network because it's not just simply a response to the way that the University of Amsterdam has been reorganized in the past 15 years to become much more like, well, basically to be operated not like an academic community, but to be operated like a business, which includes speculation on financial markets, in real estate markets, and which means increasingly a separation between research and teaching, where research is something that becomes the job of a privileged few who have access to major funding, and where teaching, with fewer and fewer hours available, becomes a task of an undervalued and increasingly precarious labor force that has no access to permanent contracts, that is continuously shuffled back and forth from one department to the other, and in which the students and staff are ultimately victimized by a system in which they have no real voice. And the New University is the product of a number of student movements that I think, in Amsterdam in any case, really came out of the humanities faculty. The humanities faculty, not only because we as humanities scholars are generally kind of interested in imaginative ways, critical ways of thinking, not that there's no imagination outside of humanities, but you know, literature, science fiction, movies, you know, and philosophy are some of the primary fields in which I think we try to establish what are real values, what are societal shared values, how do we express them, and how do we relate them to our own historical context. On the other hand, the humanities are one of the academic fields that have been most difficult to fit into the system of valorization and marketization that has come to dominate the universities. What we've seen is that what in the Netherlands is called the eerste geldstroom, the money coming directly from the government as direct subsidies into research in the universities, has petered out into an almost negligible trickle, while those who want to do a PhD are increasingly encouraged to access the second geldstroom, to find funding in larger government institutions like NVO or European ones like ERC, or especially the third geldstroom, which is getting money from companies or other cultural institutions. So my experience with MA students who wanted to pursue a career as an academic and wanted to get a PhD position was that it was increasingly hopeless to apply for a funded PhD position within the university, of which there are fewer and fewer, especially in the humanities, but that all these kinds of weird matching funds, you know, getting half of your money from a business, or trying to find, like say, go find a museum that might want to like pay for half of your salary as a PhD student, and we'll match that with some money of our own. These are the kinds of ways in which the market has become an increasingly dominant factor in these kinds of funding decisions. And of course this reverses the whole idea of inquisitive research, because it means that also the direction that research takes becomes dominated and actually defined by the commercial interests that hand out the money. Sorry, that was a really long answer, but I just felt I needed to be a little bit more elaborate.
For instance, I don't know all about this. For instance, what you told us all about the fact that you can't even get a funded PhD because you have to talk to other institutions, companies, or museums to fund the other half. That's unbelievable. This is definitely not something I expected. I thought this new university was against this attitude of creating cogs rather than educated persons, but this is scandalous.
Well, you know, that the idea that what the university then ends up doing is not creating, you know, critical thinkers, independent scholars, independent-minded, creative individuals, but is creating, you know, obedient subjects that have a certain definable and marketable skill set. I think this is one of the symptoms of a kind of thinking that has gone into the reorganization of universities. And so the new university's 6 demands, which have been going out in the same way for many years, and which our platform that I've recently helped set up in the past just week actually in Amsterdam, Rethink UvA, has tried to find ways to help foreground those 6 demands, which are about these very issues we've been talking about, and find ways or to express the fact that these sentiments are not just student sentiments, and these problems are not just student problems, that these problems affect all academics working in universities today, and that it is also not just a humanities problem. We've seen in the past weeks when the media have deigned to, give some degree of attention to this ongoing movement, I'll call it, that it's focused very strongly on what they're calling small languages, as if such a thing exists, right? The kleine Tale. The idea that what is that scholars teaching Slavic languages, Russian being a small language is kind of weird, but or Arabic, things that seem like of vital importance to being a global citizen today, that the fact that they don't attract hundreds or dozens of students each year, but a small handful, that means that they have no legitimacy, and that therefore they are not rendable, they are not sufficiently cost efficient, and therefore they must go. That this has been, I guess, a general perception of what this movement is about. And one of the things that we've been trying to do as Rethink UvA is actually to say, no, it's like humanities are kind of the front line in an assault that is being waged on all of academia. Not just in the Netherlands, but internationally.
All of academia?
All of academia. When I talk to colleagues working in mathematics or in computational sciences, they have the same story to tell. They say, what we're dealing with is top-down management. Management that has roles that are very far removed from actual research and teaching. People who don't know how to talk to academic staff and who don't know how to talk to students, but who make all the crucial decisions about how departments are organized. And a structure in which research is entirely market-driven. So colleagues of mine working in exact sciences, for instance, will complain about the fact that a very small minority of staff members actually has access to funding for research, and the rest is in the same situation that most humanities scholars are. They're spending all their hours being underpaid and overworked in menial teaching jobs that give them no career perspectives. This kind of winner-take-all model, where if you get funding once, you'll get funding again, and you'll get bigger and bigger funding. And this way, all the money starts moving to one small group. This is not just a humanities problem, it's also not a social science problem, it's a university-wide problem.
Okay, but Mr. Blommaert, do you also feel the same way? Did you see one of these symptoms in your faculty, in the humanities faculty? Budget cuts, division between teaching and research, anything like that?
Well, last year, most of the year was basically consumed for us by a very big battle over reorganization. So we lost effectively 12 colleagues in our department.
Reorganization? What
Reorganization
does that mean in human terms?
Reduction of staff, basically,
right.
Making people redundant on the grounds that were outlined.
On the grounds of budget cuts or efficiency?
Efficiency, but then again, I mean, it's efficiency with very weird methods of calculation, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the work, and I think that was hinted at by you, Dan, a lot of the work we do is invisible.
Yeah.
Like these days, applying for funding. There's a big European round now, Horizon 2020, now those are huge applications. And making one is easily 3 months labor, very, very hard labor, with a 3% say success rate, 3%.
You have to apply and you have to invest how many hours?
In our unit, approximately 1,000 for one application.
Yeah. You invest 1,000 hours and then
Let me finish, because if you don't get, I mean, if you get it, then of course these 1,000 hours are visible. If you don't get it, 97% of the applications do not get it. It is as if we've never spent these 1,000 hours. Now, on the basis of all of that invisible work, you get a very weird sort of FTE, which is highly, let's say, simplified.
Could you please tell me what's FTE?
FTE is labor time, okay? And it appeared that none of us were working hard enough in relation to the sort of definable output, which is why we lost colleagues.
But who is it who says if your application passes or not? Who is that institution, or what criteria do they use?
Economic ones.
Economic ones. Yeah. And who decides? The university?
Right.
Increasingly, the key term in all of these funding applications, the one that I keep running into more and more, is valorization. And valorization is, I just want to make clear, valorization is not a pointless term. I mean, valorization is important as a term in the sense that as a publicly funded institution, the university must, of course, valorize itself. It must have relevance to the society that it's a part of. And one of the things that we've been trying to stress as well is that this is not a movement to return to like the way the university used to be, which people perceive, you know, when it was faculty driven, faculty organized, when universities, as part of this you know, social democratic state of the 1960s, 1970s, early 1980s, was a slow, bureaucratic, and very, very elite institution. We don't want to go back to that, but the point that we're trying to make is that running it like a business, or assuming that first of all, assuming that businesses are run efficiently and that model is the best way of running anything in the world, and the only one, right, is a completely, you know, or dubious assumption, just to put it very mildly. Businesses are not run, a lot of businesses are not run efficiently, and most businesses need a lot of help from tax benefits, state intervention, et cetera, in order to keep them afloat. And you know, just think of the too big to fail you know, crisis that banks went through just quite recently, showing how inefficiently and how actually irresponsibly so many businesses are actually run. But valorization is being defined in terms of direct market value, and this again, and I'll certainly second that opinion, is being done increasingly in irrational ways. To give a very clear example, within the Humanities faculty of the University of Amsterdam, the faculty management had decided that in their recent proposal to restructure, because part of this is all about flexible, continuous restructurings, had decided that in order to make their budget, in order to reduce the budget deficit, from now on, only MA degrees that attracted a minimum of 20 students would be considered eligible. Now, I was speaking with a colleague of mine in Italian, in the Italian department, and he said, well, you know, that means that's the end for us, because we get on average about a dozen students for our MA per year, which makes them by far the largest MA in the Netherlands, because there are 2 other MA degrees in Italian offered in the Netherlands, and they each get 1 student per year. So there's no like context in which you say, well, actually, you know, within the national context, this is quite a big institution and one that has a tradition and expertise that would be lost if we get rid of it. But also, with 10 students, they're not running at a loss at all. There is no financial loss. In fact, like the BA degree in Greek that is being offered, which does attract only like 1 or 2 students per year, their staff has been reduced to the point where they too are simply breaking even. So they're not even running at a loss. So the idea that getting rid of those departments would actually help resolve any kind of financial deficit that nobody knows how the faculty got in the first place. And nobody knows how big it is. So there's reports of 10 million, 13 million. Nobody knows how it got there. They're saying we need now, in order to, the problem that we clearly created as management now needs to be resolved by making redundant more staff members in one of the cheapest to run, you know, faculties that the university even has, which is, all you need is a bunch of offices with, you know, people with books and low salaries, and that's really all.
Mr. Blommaert, do you actually break even, or do you make loss, or do you still have to reduce your staff, or do you still feel the pressure at efficiency, or was it kind of done after you made 12 people redundant?
Let me first talk about the struggle. I mean, the announcement of reorganization was basically out of the blue. I do not recall any round of negotiation or even, you know, announcement and open debate about it. So we didn't know the criteria, actually. We didn't know the benchmarks that we did not make and so on. There was a problem with the budget. Then again, a weird problem in the sense, you know, that 1 week, I don't remember the figures, but let's say it was something like 80,000, and the next week it had become 180,000. On grounds we never knew, right? And then it became, of course, a reason to make people redundant, that sort of thing. So I don't recall any democratic level of consultation, you know, preceding the decision of reorganization, and then when the reorganization itself was moving along, it was all black boxed. It was all black boxed. Let me give you one example, and I'm not saying that, you know, to blame the people who were directly involved, but just to highlight the structure of the procedures. There was a list of individuals who would be on, lose their jobs. And all of us could make an appointment with the dean, an individual appointment with the dean, basically to ask whether I would be on the list. All right. So I make this appointment. I'm a research leader, so I have a reasonably huge group of people with whom I work, 19 people with whom I work. And so I made this appointment because it was actually the only way in which I could get the facts. I walked in, and of course they said, you know, it's going to be a very short conversation because you're not in the line of fire, and we can only discuss your case. I said, my case is 19 people, right? Because I'm a research leader. The way I work as an individual is completely wired up, you know, with how these other people are functioning. Even more, we were writing that application, the enormous, let's say, European funding application at the moment. I had to know who would be there the next year to do the research, right? And that's when, and again, imagine the world in which we are. Eh? They negotiated, so it was the dean and a director of the faculty, and they looked at each other and said, we are not in a position to offer names. You can mention names, and we will not. August.
So,
21st century, the Netherlands.
Transparency.
This university, yeah. That's how I got basically to know that a number of the people in my group would be made redundant. So I had to volunteer the names, and then they would say, yes.
Well, that's a bit
Bit of work to be done here.
This is just grotesque. I can't really believe this is
It's
happening.
very painful as well. Very, very painful. If you have to walk
It's
that
violent.
road.
It's a form of violence. It's an abstraction, in fact, of violence. But one point that I want to make to add to that as well is, like, or actually to add to my previous comment about the irrationality of these kinds of managerial financial decisions, is that even like. Even if Italian was running at a loss, right, or if Greek is running at a loss, or if Arabic is running at a loss, at a financial loss, I mean, one of the points we're trying to make is that should not mean, therefore, that it has no value, right? Like, and I think that one of the things that the new university has been trying to put back on the agenda is precisely this: the question of value. And again, the front line of this is in the humanities, where people feel that in the current cultural and economic climate, that where everything is judged on the basis of its direct marketable value, its directly realizable marketable value, like literary studies, philosophy, the study of languages and culture, media studies, things that are intellectual pursuits that are actually fundamental to understand, to answering, to asking questions, and then trying to answer them about who, where, why we are. But these things are not definable in those kinds of terms, and that therefore the whole rationale of saying every faculty and every department should be run on a pure profit versus loss ratio is a faulty assumption to begin with, and one that we need to talk about much more widely as a society.
Could I add something to that? Because I mean, there is this idea now of value being money, basically. So how does the budget look after you have done your program, after you've done your research and so on? So that's the notion of value. And it goes hand in hand with a vision in which research itself has no value anymore, is value free, right? And I find that a very, 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 let's say, dangerous idea as well. We have to be objective. Now, objective is very often a refusal to face the real interests that are lodged in the research that we're doing, right? But we're no longer, let's say, supposed to speak about the value in the process of research itself, right? For instance, the way in which it addresses weak groups in society who cannot afford us within an economic model, right? Yeah. No, that has to be moved aside because value is after the fact and only financial. Right. So the only value that we have or that we generate now is a market value which is expressed in money, the amount of external funding you draw in, and then of course your operational budget that needs to be balanced or you need to have a different surplus.
The bottom line.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could clarify for me if I'm correct in understanding that the UvA, they are facing losses, you know that these are not made by, for example, Italian or Arabic studies.
No.
But even so, even though we don't really, because of a transparency problem, we don't know where these losses exactly come from, they still want to cut those studies because there are losses, even though those studies are not what create the losses.
Yes. Yes.
Right,
This is why, I mean, we as well, I was going to say organized platform, but that might be a little bit of an overstatement. But as a platform for expressing the concerns of UvA employees at this in alliance with the new university right now. We issued, as you may have heard, we issued a set of demands to the executive board of the University of Amsterdam last week. We issued them on Wednesday, gave them an ultimatum till Friday to concede our 3 primary demands, which were for us a precondition to then engage in a debate, because first towards the students and then towards us, the response from the executive board has always been, we would love to talk to you, why don't you come up into our office and then we'll have some kind of negotiation or discussion where we will hear your points. And our response has always been, as has the students' response, we have been doing this for many years now, through works councils, through student councils, through all of the organs that exist that had once had a kind of say in the way that the university was organized, and our continuous experience has been that we've been marginalized and that none of our protests have ever been taken into account. And this is why the students finally decided, okay, we've tried everything. We've had protests in the street, we've joined we've been on every political platform, we've put ourselves up for election, we've talked until the cows come home, and nobody's listening, right? Because the problem, therefore, is not in the fact that we are not making these points and making ourselves heard, but that the organizational form that our university has does not allow for structural dissent, or only in ways that are purely decorative, right? So, like I had a weird experience a couple of years ago. It was one of the great thrills of my life. I was nominated for as lecturer of the year by my students, which is a kind of, weird idols-ish competition where students from across the UvA are all encouraged to cast a vote for their favorite teacher, and then out of these, a board of students selects 5 nominees from across the university, and then on the day, the Dies Natalis, the day where the university celebrates itself, they have this little film that they present with all these teachers talking about how much they love to teach and how they teach, and the students talking about them, to show to the world that the UvA is really invested in excellence in teaching, right? While the reality is, the reality that I have experienced for 10 years as being a non-permanent staff member at UvA, I've been temporary for 10 years now, is that it's in fact the opposite. Not only does the university not care about quality in teaching, but if you take the trouble to invest time and energy into teaching, that is time and energy that you cannot put into research, which is the only way in which your work is judged by anyone at any level of power. So you are not rewarded for good teaching, you are penalized for it, but what the university as a marketing business wants to do, it needs to attract students, and therefore it has to put a kind of message out, we care about teaching. So I ultimately felt very, very ambivalent about this. On the one hand, there was this incredible honor of a thing that you never experience, students actually standing up and saying, that thing you do, we kind of like it, which is awesome, because you're, fundamentally insecure as a teacher in front of a classroom. But at the same time, that message is incorporated into the university's administrative center saying, we would like you to be like our thing to show that this is all so terribly important to us while you know it's not. Right? That's just a little illustration of the kind of tension that exists between research and teaching.
Before I give you the word, please, we have a question. Sir.
I wanted to say something about your question still. There's also a thing about humanities, of course, as being the vulnerable dimension of universities, not just in the Netherlands, but all over Europe. And it is a fact that within university management, for the moment, you have a very clear sort of hierarchy of, say, programs, but also faculties, all right? And that humanities are all the way down. Now we do a lot of research on, let's say, perception and the public debate and so on. And if you look at, let me put it this way: if Google image would have existed in the 1970s, and you would have Googled academic or researcher, you would have had an image of a man reading in a world of books, right? Now it's a young woman, usually Chinese, in a lab, right? So that's where we are. So from reading and from being the sort of neutral image of research, we have become an exception, basically, and a sort of unwanted form of doing research. And you see that at all levels. That's one of the things that I mentioned also, or at least hinted at when I was say speaking about the fact that research itself has no value anymore. Well, in the humanities, there is no way in which you can be neutral, because there are always real interests of real individuals involved, right? You can do that when you're doing nanoscience, right? Or you can do it when you're doing engineering, right? It would be all sorts of other interests that would be served there. But in our case, we cannot be neutral. Now, if you look at almost every new document that has to do with organizing the work of research itself, for instance, just yesterday, this new announcement of general ethics of research, look at the sort of idea they have implicitly articulated there of a science. It is purely driven by statistics, right? So everything they say about, for instance, data management, about informed consent. How are you going to get informed consent when you're a historian working on an archive from somebody in the 18th century? How? Well, we have to get informed consent now. Big problem for historians. They just overlook, that there are disciplines that work in a completely different way, and that in fact almost 80% of real science does it in a completely different way. But that's the perception we have to fight all the time. But it also explains why the first, let's say, exercises of reorganization, of, let's say, of entrenching this idea of efficiency in management is always done in the humanities and or social sciences, depending on how they are organized.
Thank you. Well, question, sir.
Thank you. Maybe I should say first that I'm the Dean of the Humanities currently.
Welcome here.
As of January 1st, so I wasn't Dean I want to as well. I think the critical thought itself has to be challenged as well from time to time. There are elements there that I clearly agree with. I think the model of a business is not the right model, but then we are looking for what are we like, because there is a practical side to it. I have to make sure we pay salaries in a couple of months again. So for me, the model is more like a household, a family household, where you have a mixture of interests and you somehow try to balance that, but you can't satisfy everything. So there's still a kind of challenging issue of how to handle it. And for instance, for the University of Amsterdam in the humanities, there are partly decisions higher up that hit the humanities, but partly they lost, I think, 25% of their students in the last couple of years. Well, if you have less students, then that you have somehow to face difficult choices in the household. So that's my colleague in the humanities in Amsterdam. I don't envy him. I not only for the recent thing, but also for the situation a year ago. I mean, the development that he had to handle. But I agree on some of the emphasis on buildings and so on. Well, we need to take care of buildings, so we need to renovate from time to time and so on. But we don't need to speculate on buildings. But we do need those practical sides. I'm a bit concerned about how black and white the image is, how much it is as if the recent past is really, well, the students that graduated 2 years ago or 1 year ago aren't just cogs in a machine. They're independent beings as well. I mean, we can improve, we can do better on elements. But we shouldn't, I think, discard or be so dismissive about the recent past. Yeah, well, that's a few comments.
Thank you.
If I can respond, you're not my dean, so I can speak freely. No, I don't envy anybody in any of these management positions at all. Especially not our dean, Frank Frey, in the University of Humanities, who I've known. He was my professor within the Media Studies department, and it's an impossible job to have. I think what's been happening in Amsterdam, in any case, I think, is that slowly but surely, right, the message has been coming through to people who have ended up, for whatever reason, in often thankless positions of management where they are only in extremely limited control of the decisions that they have to enforce and have to make. That this bottom-up sound is something to join rather than to resist. And this is, I mean, the reason I was a little bit late joining the stage here was because I had to talk to a bunch of reporters about the fact that the College van Bestuur, our executive board at the University of Amsterdam, just now at 11 o'clock, issued a new statement indicating a new direction for management in the university. Because what we've been trying to do as Rethink UvA is also establish, like, there are problems that are specific to this university, right? And we need to distinguish those, like things that are resolvable, that have to do with the way that with problems of scale, with problems of democratization, with problems of issues of flexible versus permanent staffing, and with questions of sort of, value and how to define questions of valorization. Right? Those are things that you can say, well, those are the debates that can be quite specific to departments and to individual universities. There's also a much larger situation or problem, which has to do with the way that Dutch universities, as public institutions, are dependent upon decisions made by government in The Hague. And this is where both the students and fellow staff members who have been trying to join them have been saying to the board and to our deans, we need you to support these basic positions that are really not that radical, right? Positions that are about saying what we need. Firstly, there is a desire for more democracy, right? For more of a sense that it's good for students and staff to have a sense that they have a voice within their own academic community, a structural voice. And this, the way this is organized depends from one university to the other, but in the case of UvA, we feel that there is a lot can be improved there. There's also the question of sort of how to deal with the rendementsdenken, which has become the one term that everybody instantly sort of recognizes and despises, right? The idea that the world is not a marketplace, that the sense that we now live in a kind of fundamentally capitalist realism where everything revolves around numbers, and where especially, I think, people outside the university have been maybe shocked even by the idea, like, well, I know that my business is run by a bunch of managers who care only about money, but surely in the university it should be different, right? Surely there are philosophers and people poring over books and thinking great thoughts that are not defined immediately by their market value. So I think these are important strategic terms to get the discussion going, right? To get the discussion going about what is the university, what do we want it to be, what is it in danger of becoming, right? And we like to use strong words in order to get the debate going, but I think if we look to the UK and to the US, we see a lot of bad examples of what can happen if we continue down that road. Right? So I think in that sense, I all credit, literally all credit to our students for this, for standing up, for saying the things that they said there. If even one student feels like this is the culture that they're now a part of, and let's stand up and do something to change it, to do whatever we can to have our voices be heard, to spend the night in jail if necessary, right? To not shower for days on end and hang out in the Blommaert, which was no party. I was there almost every day. It was not a party of students gone wild. It was a structured sacrifice that students were giving for the benefit of all of us. Right? So I think that is what is mobilizing the discussion, and I think it's not so bad to start off with a bit of an exaggeration, right? To say like, boo, right? This is what's going to happen if we don't watch out. This is what's going to happen if this is the course we're going down. Let's try and change it. Let's try and have that debate and rethink, right? Rethink.
Dan, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to jump in. We're almost out of time, so we have one last question. Then we officially end, but we can take 5 minutes break. If Mr. Blommaert and Mr. Hesselfors would still like to continue the discussion, we can still continue, and whoever would like to stay after those 5 minutes, we can still go on. Would you would you, sirs, still like to discuss more?
Yes.
Okay, so then we have one more question, scheduled end. Whoever has to catch a lecture or has to be somewhere, you can peacefully leave or grab a sandwich or a cup of coffee. And after 5 minutes, we're back and we'll go on with the discussion. So, one last question before the break.
Yeah. Okay, and now I'm a bit embarrassed that I have the mic for the last question because you basically answered it just now. But I wanted to ask about, because we've been talking and hearing about the situation that for the staff of universities a lot, but this started as a student movement, as you just said, and I was wondering what were the exact situations that students found themselves in, or their concerns, or what do they want to contribute, and also maybe to bring it a bit more at home for us, why is it that Tilburg students don't seem to be as concerned perhaps as the Amsterdam students are?
I can answer that question for you, if I may.
Could we
sure?
Yes, please do.
Please.
I'm here on behalf of the New University of Tilburg. It's quite new for me speaking to an audience, so sorry for that. We are not as far as the student movement in Amsterdam, but we are getting there. We saw the problem of the valorization and financialization of academia. And the thing that defines us, and us I mean a few students from cultural studies and philosophy, is that we try to instigate discussion, instigate debate, raise awareness. And at the moment that is our only objective. So I asked the students here to join us, the Tilburg University students to join us in our discussions.
Speak up a bit?
Yeah, sure. I asked the students of Tilburg University to join us in our discussion. We have events planned in the near future. The main objective is to start a process of discussion that will may or may not end with a progress similar to the progress we saw in Amsterdam. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, please applause. And we have a break now.
I'll just say something. Because
absolutely. Please, a minute.
It is easy to overlook, or at least it is easy to believe that this would just be a local sort of issue in Amsterdam or indeed the Netherlands. But there has been student protest and staff protest all over Europe, in fact, for now almost, say, 20 years, since the introduction of the Bologna Agreement, right? And always the arguments were the same. We are now in a sort of environment in which we are no longer incited to collaborate with each other, but to compete with each other. And as a consequence, we are not improving as academics. We are basically getting worse. So what is effectively now labeled as excellence is in reality, in the reality of academic life and intellectual life, is mediocrity. Now that argument is not new. It has been around for approximately 2 decades. And we really have to take it seriously, because this is really not the only place. I mean, I know of movements, of course, in Ghent, Belgium, all over the place, in the UK, in Greece, in Germany, in Italy, and in Spain, and they're saying exactly the same things. All of them are saying exactly the same things. So it is high time, that somebody starts listening. But for us, I think also, when we mobilize, when we organize the struggle, the action, and so on, we have to think about scale. This is not a local thing. And you have vastly, say, bigger audiences out there than what you believe you have here, right? And you really have to keep that in mind. It's a very important strategic element.
And if I may add one small point, just one small point to that, right? Don't underestimate, the power of young people with ideals willing to express them and struggle for them. What I've seen happening, what started with just a handful of students, right, is a protest that is impossible to argue with. Nobody is getting up and mobilizing and saying, we need more neoliberalization, we need more managerialism, we need to protect our poor management that makes 220,000 euros a year sitting only in this job and has positions in all kinds of other boards as well. We need to protect them from this assault on their privilege. Nobody does that because they would be wrong, and it's so obviously wrong. So what the media are reporting, right, is not a small group of students has experienced about what's going on. They're reporting that teachers, researchers, and students are unhappy with the way their university is being organized, and they want to improve it. I mean, now how do you fight against that kind of cause if there are people to wage that fight? You can't win the argument, right? So all you need to do is support them, right? And you're there, yeah? And you're there, and you've got the momentum right now of the media being aware of this problem, the Minister of Education expressing herself very carefully about understanding the sentiment behind the students and behind the teachers, and that we might have to start rethinking a number of allocation models and things like that. Ride that tide, you know, and change it. Anyway.
Thank you. Before we go about that, let's come back in 5 minutes.